Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. Henry's head throbbed as consciousness slowly returned. He blinked, his vision blurry and unfocused. The air felt different, thinner, with an unfamiliar metallic tang. As his eyes adjusted, panic seized him. This wasn't his bedroom. Sleek metal walls surrounded him, curving upward to a domed ceiling that pulsed with an eerie blue light. Henry tried to sit up, but his limbs felt leaden. He was lying on some sort of examination table, the surface cool against his bare skin. "What the hell?" he mumbled, his voice hoarse. Suddenly, a door slid open with a soft hiss. Henry's eyes widened as several figures entered. They were humanoid but unmistakably alien, tall and lithe, with skin in various shades of blue. All of them were female, at least as far as he could tell. One of them stepped forward, her piercing gaze fixed on Henry. Her skin was a deep azure, offsetting striking silver eyes. Despite his confusion and fear, Henry couldn't help but notice her ethereal beauty. "The specimen is awake," she announced, her voice melodic yet clinical. "Prepare him for the tribunal." Henry tried to speak, to demand answers, but his tongue felt thick in his mouth. Two of the blue women approached, effortlessly lifting him from the table. His legs buckled as they set him upright, and he would have fallen if not for their firm grip on his arms. "Where am I?" Henry finally managed to croak out. "Who are you people?" The woman who seemed to be in charge, the one with the silver eyes, merely arched an eyebrow. "All will be explained shortly. For now, you will come with us." They half led, half dragged Henry through winding corridors, the blue light pulsing in time with his racing heartbeat. Finally, they entered a vast circular chamber. At its center stood a raised dais, upon which sat 5 more of the blue-skinned women. Their expressions were impassive as they regarded Henry. "Bring the human forward," commanded one of the seated women. Her voice rang with authority, and Henry realized he was facing some sort of leadership council or tribunal. As they positioned him before the dais, Henry's gaze was drawn to one particular member of the tribunal. Her skin was a soft, shimmering turquoise, her eyes a mesmerizing deep blue. She seemed younger than the others, and there was a flicker of something in her expression as she looked at him. Curiosity? Sympathy? Henry couldn't be sure. The apparent leader of the tribunal spoke again. "Human male, you have been brought before us to serve a vital purpose. Our civilization faces a crisis, and you hold the key to our survival." Henry's mind reeled. What? "Look, there's been some kind of mistake. I'm just a regular guy from Earth. I don't know anything about—" "Silence!" Another tribunal member cut him off. "You will speak when given permission." The leader continued, her tone brooking no argument. "Our species is dying. A genetic anomaly has rendered us incapable of producing male offspring. Without new genetic material, we face extinction within generations." Henry's mouth went dry as the implication sank in. "And that's where I come in?" The turquoise-skinned woman he'd noticed earlier leaned forward slightly. "You are to be the progenitor of a new lineage," she explained, her voice softer than the others. "Your genetic makeup is compatible with ours. You will father the next generation of our people." "Whoa, hold on," Henry protested, finding his voice. "You can't just kidnap someone and force them to breed. This is insane." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Your cooperation is not required, merely your genetic material. However, willing participation would be preferable." Henry's mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. "Look, I understand you're in a tough situation, but there has to be another way. Maybe I could contact Earth, get volunteers or donations or something." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the tribunal. The woman with silver eyes still standing near Henry spoke. Your planet is primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel. We have been observing humanity for centuries. You were chosen specifically for this task. But why me? Henry demanded. I'm nobody special. The turquoise woman, Aria, Henry would later learn, answered. Your genetic profile is ideal, strong, diverse, with few hereditary weaknesses. You are also. She paused, her gaze sweeping over him in a way that made Henry acutely aware of his nakedness, physically suitable. Henry felt a flush creep up his neck, equal parts embarrassment and an unexpected flicker of arousal. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the dire reality of his situation. This is kidnapping, he argued. It's a violation of my rights. You can't just— Your Earth concepts of rights do not apply here, the tribunal leader interrupted coldly. You will fulfill your purpose, willingly or not. The survival of our species depends on it. Henry's fists clenched at his sides. And if I refuse? The silver-eyed woman placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch sending an involuntary shiver through him. Refusal is not an option, Henry Matthews of Earth. You will provide what we need, one way or another. How do you know my name? Henry asked, startled. A thin smile curved the woman's lips. We know everything about you, Henry. Your likes, your dislikes, your deepest desires and darkest fears. We chose you for a reason. Henry tried to step back, but her grip tightened. This is wrong, he insisted. I won't do it. You can't make me. The leader of the tribunal rose, her voice like ice. We have methods of ensuring compliance, human. It would be in your best interest to cooperate willingly. You mean torture? Henry spat, fear and anger warring within him. Aria spoke up, her tone almost gentle. Not torture, Henry, but there are ways to persuade you, to make you eager to fulfill your role. The implication in her words, combined with the way her eyes roved over him, sent a jolt of heat through Henry's body. He cursed his traitorous physiology, willing himself to focus on the horror of his situation rather than any misplaced arousal. This is insane, he muttered, more to himself than the aliens surrounding him. I have to be dreaming. The silver-eyed woman's grip loosened slightly, her touch becoming almost caressing. I assure you, this is very real, but it need not be unpleasant, Henry. Cooperate, and you will be treated well. Resist, and— She trailed off, the threat clear in her tone. Henry's mind raced, searching for a way out. Look, even if I agreed, which I don't, one guy can't repopulate an entire species. It's not genetically viable. A murmur passed through the tribunal. Aria leaned forward, her eyes bright with what might have been excitement. We have methods of accelerating reproduction and genetic diversity. Your contribution, combined with our technology, will be sufficient. But, Henry began, only to be cut off by the tribunal leader. Enough discussion. The human will be taken to the preparation chambers. Aria, you will oversee his acclimation. Aria stood, descending from the dais with fluid grace. As she approached, Henry couldn't help but notice the sway of her hips, the way her form-fitting garment hugged her curves. He silently berated himself for noticing such things at a time like this. Come, Henry, Aria said, her voice low and melodious. I will explain more as we go. As the silver-eyed woman released him, Henry considered making a break for it. But where would he run? He was on an alien planet surrounded by beings with technology far beyond his understanding. Escape seemed impossible. With a resigned sigh, he allowed Aria to lead him from the chamber. As they walked, Henry's mind whirled with questions and fears. How had he ended up in this situation? Was there any way out? And perhaps most troublingly, why did part of him feel an undeniable attraction to these alien women despite the circumstances? Aria's voice interrupted his thoughts. I know this must be overwhelming for you, Henry, but I assure you, we mean you no harm. Your role here is vital, and you will be honored for it. Henry scoffed. Honored? You kidnapped me and are basically turning me into a breeding stud. How is that honorable? A small smile played at the corners of Aria's mouth. Many men on your planet would consider it quite an honor to be desired by so many women. Not like this, Henry insisted, though he felt a treacherous heat in his cheeks. This isn't right. Aria stopped, turning to face him fully. Her deep blue eyes seemed to peer into his soul. Henry, I understand your reservations, but please believe me when I say that this is necessary. Our entire civilization hangs in the balance. For a moment, Henry almost felt sympathetic. Then he remembered his own predicament. That doesn't justify kidnapping and forced breeding. There has to be another way. We've explored every option, Aria said softly. This is our last hope, and you, Henry Matthews, are the key to our survival. As they resumed walking, Henry's mind raced. Part of him wanted to keep arguing, to rail against the injustice of it all. But another part, a part he was trying desperately to ignore, felt a thrill at the idea of being so desired, so needed. They reached another door which slid open at Aria's approach. Inside was a spacious chamber, far more comfortable looking than the examination room he'd woken up in. A large bed dominated one wall, while another held what appeared to be some sort of entertainment system. These will be your quarters, Aria explained. You'll find everything you need here. Food, clothing, entertainment, all tailored to your preferences. Henry's eyebrows shot up. My preferences? How could you possibly know? As we said, we've been studying you for some time, Aria interrupted. We want you to be comfortable here, Henry. Comfortable? Henry laughed bitterly. I'm a prisoner. Aria's expression softened. I prefer to think of you as an honored guest, one whose cooperation is vital to our future. She stepped closer, and Henry caught a whiff of an exotic, intoxicating scent. His body responded traitorously, and he took a step back. I won't do it, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. I won't be part of this. Aria's lips curved in a knowing smile. We'll see, Henry. I think you'll find that resistance becomes difficult in time. With that, she turned and left the room, the door sliding shut behind her. Henry heard the distinct sound of a lock engaging. Alone in his new prison, Henry sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. How had this happened? How could he possibly get out of this situation? And perhaps most troublingly, why did part of him feel a growing excitement at the prospect of what lay ahead? As the reality of his captivity settled in, Henry realized he faced a battle not just against his alien captors, but against his own desires and instincts. Maintaining his autonomy and moral principles would be a constant struggle, one he wasn't entirely sure he could win. Henry paced his lavish prison, days blurring together in a haze of frustration and simmering anger. The room, despite its comforts, felt more confining with each passing hour. He'd tried reasoning, pleading, even threatening, all to no avail. The tribunal remained unmoved, their resolve as unyielding as the metal walls surrounding him. A chime signaled the arrival of his daily visitor. The door slid open, revealing Aria. Her turquoise skin seemed to shimmer in the artificial light, and Henry cursed the involuntary quickening of his pulse. "Good morning, Henry," she said, her voice melodious. "How are you feeling today?" Henry snorted. "Oh, just peachy. Love being held captive and treated like a prized bull." Aria's brow furrowed. "I've told you, you're not a prisoner. You're an honored guest, right?" Henry cut her off. Funny how this honored guest can't leave his room without an escort. A flicker of something, regret, frustration, passed across Aria's face. "Henry, please. We're trying to make this as comfortable as possible for you. Comfortable? Henry laughed bitterly. You want comfortable? Let me go home. Let me have a choice in all this. Aria stepped closer, her scent washing over him, an intoxicating blend of alien flora that made his head spin. You know we can't do that. The fate of our entire species. Yeah, I've heard the speech, Henry interrupted. He turned away, trying to ignore the way his body responded to her proximity. Have you considered that maybe your species isn't meant to survive? That this is just natural selection at work? The words were cruel, and he regretted them as soon as they left his mouth. Iria recoiled as if struck. How dare you, she hissed, her usual composure cracking. We have built a civilization that has lasted millennia. We have achieved things your primitive species can barely comprehend, and you suggest we should simply give up? Henry turned back to her, startled by the intensity of her reaction. For the first time, he saw real emotion in those alien eyes, anger, yes, but also fear and desperation. I'm sorry, he said softly. That was uncalled for. I'm just frustrated, scared. I didn't ask for any of this. Aria's expression softened slightly. I know, and I truly am sorry for the distress this causes you. But you must understand, we have no other choice. Henry sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. There's always a choice, Aria. Always another way. Not this time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We've explored every option, Henry, every possibility. This is our last hope. The despair in her voice stirred something in Henry, a mix of sympathy and an odd sense of power. He realized with a jolt that these alien women truly were dependent on him. It was a heady feeling, one that both thrilled and terrified him. Aria seemed to sense the shift in his mood. She stepped closer again, her hand reaching out to brush his arm. The touch sent electricity through his body. It doesn't have to be unpleasant, you know, she murmured, her eyes locked on his. We can make this mutually beneficial. Henry swallowed hard, his resolve wavering. I can't. It's not right. Aria's lips curved in a knowing smile. Your body seems to disagree, Henry. He flushed, acutely aware of his physical reaction to her proximity. That's just biology. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it? Aria's hand trailed up his arm, leaving goosebumps in its wake. Perhaps it's time you stopped fighting so hard, Henry. Embrace your role. Embrace the pleasure it can bring. For a moment, Henry was tempted. The loneliness, the frustration, the constant tension. It all seemed to melt away under Aria's touch. But then reality came crashing back. He jerked away, his voice harsh. No, I won't be manipulated like this. I'm not just some breeding stud for you to use. Aria's expression hardened. The moment of intimacy shattered. Very well. If you insist on being difficult, we have other methods. She turned on her heel, striding towards the door. Before exiting, she looked back at him, her eyes cold. The tribunal will not wait forever, Henry. One way or another, you will fulfill your purpose here. The door slid shut behind her with a final sounding click. Henry slumped onto the bed, his head in his hands. How much longer could he resist? And more troublingly, did he even want to? Days stretched into weeks, each one wearing down Henry's resolve a little more. The tribunal's tactics shifted, alternating between carrot and stick. Some days brought Iria or other alluring blue-skinned women, their touches and whispered promises designed to seduce. Other days brought isolation, sensory deprivation, or subtle psychological torments. Through it all, Henry clung to his principles, to his sense of self, but even he could feel the cracks forming in his resolve. One particularly grueling day, after hours of relentless questioning from the tribunal, Henry found himself once again alone with Aria in his quarters. But this time, something was different. The usual cool composure was gone from her eyes, replaced by a wild desperation. "Why do you keep fighting this?" she demanded, her voice raw with emotion. "Can't you see what you're doing to us? To me?" Henry blinked, taken aback by her outburst. "What I'm doing to you? Aria, you're the ones holding me captive." "Because we have no choice," she cried, advancing on him. "Our people are dying, Henry. Every day you resist, more of us lose hope. More of us." She trailed off, her voice breaking. For the first time, Henry saw past the alien exterior to the frightened, desperate woman beneath. Despite himself, he felt a surge of sympathy. "Aria," he said softly, reaching out to touch her arm. "I'm sorry, I truly am. But you have to understand, what you're asking of me, it goes against everything I believe in." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "And what about what I believe in? My people, my culture, everything I've ever known is at stake. How can you be so selfish?" The word hit Henry like a physical blow. Selfish? Was that what he was being? He'd been so focused on his own predicament, he'd never truly considered the depth of their desperation. He faltered, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I'm not trying to be selfish. I can't just give up my autonomy, my free will." Aria stepped closer, her hand coming to rest on his chest. Henry's breath caught in his throat. "What if it's not about giving up?" she whispered. "What if it's about embracing a new purpose? A chance to be part of something greater than yourself?" Henry's head swam, Aria's scent overwhelming his senses. He could feel his resolve crumbling, years of moral certainty giving way to a new, dangerous line of thinking. I don't know if I can," he murmured, even as his body leaned into her touch. Aria's lips curved into a sad smile. "You can, Henry. You're stronger than you know, strong enough to save an entire species." With that, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was electric, alien yet familiar, sending shock waves through Henry's system. For a moment, he lost himself in the sensation, all thoughts of resistance fleeing his mind. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Henry felt something fundamental shift within him. The constant battle between his principles and his desires suddenly seemed pointless, exhausting. "Okay," he heard himself say, the word barely more than a whisper. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll help you." Aria's eyes widened, hope and triumph warring in their depths. "You mean it? Truly?" Henry nodded, a strange calm settling over him. "Yes, but on one condition." "Name it," Aria said eagerly. "I want a say in how this happens. No more being treated like a mindless breeding machine. If I'm going to do this, I want to be involved in the process. I want some control." Aria hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I think that can be arranged. I'll speak with the tribunal." As she turned to leave, practically buzzing with excitement, Henry called out to her. "Aria?" She paused at the door, looking back at him questioningly. "This doesn't mean I'm okay with all of this, but I'm willing to try. For you. For your people." A soft smile graced her lips. "Thank you, Henry. You won't regret this." As the door closed behind her, Henry sank onto the bed, his mind reeling. What had he just agreed to? Was he really going to go through with this? But as he sat there contemplating his decision, a new feeling began to take root. It wasn't quite excitement, not yet, but it was possibility, power even. He'd been so focused on what he was losing, he'd never considered what he might gain. These women needed him, desperately. And now that he'd agreed to cooperate, that need gave him leverage, influence, maybe even control. A plan began to form in Henry's mind. He'd play along for now, give them what they wanted. But all the while, he'd be watching, learning, finding their weaknesses. And when the time was right, he'd use that knowledge, not to escape. He was beginning to realize that might be impossible, but to carve out a place for himself in this alien world, a position of power and respect. As he lay back on the bed, a small, dark smile played at the corners of Henry's mouth. They thought they'd won, that they'd broken him. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. The tribunal had wanted a savior for their species. Instead, they might just have created something far more dangerous. Henry closed his eyes, his mind racing with possibilities. Tomorrow, he'd begin his new role, but it wouldn't be the role they expected. No, he had much grander plans in mind. Let them think they'd tamed him. He'd play the willing stud, the cooperative captive. But all the while he'd be plotting, planning, maneuvering. They wanted him to father a new generation? Fine. But he'd make damn sure that generation knew exactly who their father was. And when the time came, they'd be loyal to him, not to some distant tribunal. As sleep finally claimed him, Henry's last thought was of Aria's kiss. He'd use that too, he decided. Her obvious attraction, her conflicted loyalties, they were tools, just waiting to be exploited. Tomorrow, the game would begin in earnest, and Henry intended to win. Henry awoke the next morning, a newfound fire burning in his veins. The hesitation and moral quandaries that had plagued him dissolved, replaced by a singular focus, power. He stretched languidly, a predatory smile playing on his lips as he contemplated the day ahead. The door chimed, right on schedule. Aria entered, her turquoise skin shimmering in the artificial light. Henry's gaze raked over her, no longer seeing a captor but a pawn in his grand design. "Good morning, Henry," Aria said, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "How are you feeling today?" Henry rose from the bed, closing the distance between them with deliberate steps. "Never better, my dear Aria. In fact, I've been thinking about our little arrangement." Aria's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, what about it?" He reached out, tracing a finger along her jawline. "I think it's time we took things to the next level, don't you? After all, I've agreed to help save your species. Shouldn't I have a say in how that happens?" Aria swallowed hard, clearly torn between desire and duty. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Henry's grin widened. "For starters, I want to be involved in every aspect of the process. No more being kept in the dark. I want to know about your reproductive technology, your genetic engineering techniques, everything." "Henry, that's highly classified information," Aria protested weakly. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "Come now, Aria. We're past such trivial concerns, aren't we? After all, I'm the key to your species' survival. Don't I deserve to know exactly what I'm part of?" Aria hesitated for a long moment before nodding slowly. I suppose that's fair. I'll speak with the tribunal." "Excellent," Henry purred. "And while you're at it, I think it's time I had a more active role in choosing my partners. After all, if we're creating a new generation, shouldn't we ensure they have the best possible genetic makeup?" Aria's brow furrowed. "What are you suggesting?" Henry's smile turned predatory. "I'm suggesting that I should have final say in who I breed with, starting with you, of course." Before Aria could respond, Henry pulled her into a searing kiss. She resisted for a moment before melting against him, a soft moan escaping her lips. As the weeks passed, Henry's influence grew exponentially. He charmed and manipulated his way through the ranks of the alien society, using his unique position to sow discord and create alliances. Each woman who came to him for breeding became another piece in his elaborate chess game. Aria, torn between her growing feelings for Henry and her duty to her people, found herself increasingly caught in his web. She was the first to conceive his child, a development that sent shockwaves through the alien society. "Congratulations," Henry said. his voice dripping with false sincerity as Arya shared the news. "I suppose this makes you rather special, doesn't it?" Arya nodded, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. "The tribunal is conflicted. Some see it as a triumph, others as a threat to the established order." Henry's eyes gleamed with opportunity. "And where do you stand in all this, my dear Arya? Surely the mother of the first new hybrid child deserves a seat at the table, so to speak." I hadn't thought about it that way," Arya admitted. "Perhaps you should," Henry suggested, his tone deceptively casual. "After all, you're carrying the future of your species. Shouldn't you have a say in shaping that future?" As Arya's pregnancy progressed, Henry's machinations intensified. He cultivated a cult of personality among the younger aliens, positioning himself as a visionary leader rather than a mere breeding stock. His children, he proclaimed, would usher in a new era of prosperity and power for their species. Meanwhile, he continued to seduce and impregnate other high-ranking aliens, each pregnancy cementing his position and creating a web of conflicting loyalties among the tribunal members. One evening, as Henry lounged in his now luxurious quarters, Arya burst in, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "The tribunal is in chaos. There's talk of overthrowing the old order, of making you some kind of leader." Henry raised an eyebrow, the picture of innocence. "Me? But I'm just a humble Earthman, remember, doing my part to save your species." Arya's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me, Henry. I know you're behind this. The question is why? What could you possibly gain from destroying our way of life?" Henry rose, his demeanor shifting from casual to commanding in an instant. "What could I gain? Everything, Arya. You took me from my home, stripped me of my freedom, and expected me to simply comply with your demands. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" "We gave you a purpose," Arya protested. "A chance to be part of something greater than yourself." Henry laughed, the sound cold and mirthless. "No, you gave me an opportunity, and I'm simply making the most of it. Your people wanted a savior. Well, here I am. The question is, are you prepared for what that really means?" Arya took a step back, her hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. "This isn't what we wanted. This isn't what I wanted." "Oh, but it is," Henry countered, advancing on her. "You wanted me to embrace my role, to father a new generation. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just ensuring that generation knows exactly who their father is and where their loyalties should lie." Arya's eyes widened with dawning horror. "You're creating a cult, a dynasty." Henry's smile was razor-sharp. "I prefer to think of it as ensuring my children's future. After all, isn't that what any good father would do?" As the alien society teetered on the brink of revolution, Henry's plans came to fruition. The old guard of the tribunal was ousted, replaced by younger, more malleable members, many of whom were carrying Henry's children. Arya, her status elevated by her position as mother of the first hybrid child, found herself caught between worlds. She was both revered and feared, her every move scrutinized by those who saw her as either a herald of the new order or a traitor to the old ways. On the eve of the birth of his first child, Henry stood before a gathering of his most loyal followers. His gaze swept over the sea of blue faces, noting with satisfaction the mix of adoration and fear in their eyes. "My friends," he began, his voice resonating through the chamber, "we stand on the precipice of a new era, an era of strength, of unity, of unprecedented power. Our children, my children, will lead us into a future brighter than any you could have imagined." The crowd cheered, their enthusiasm bordering on fanatical. Henry basked in their adulation, feeling the intoxicating rush of absolute power. As the celebration reached its peak, Henry noticed Aria standing at the back of the room, her expression unreadable. He made his way to her, cutting through the crowd like a shark through water. "Not enjoying the festivities, my dear?" he asked, his tone mockingly concerned. Aria met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and resignation. "How could you do this, Henry? How could you twist everything we believed in?" Henry chuckled, reaching out to caress her cheek. She flinched but didn't pull away. "I simply showed your people what they truly wanted, Aria. A strong leader, a visionary who could guide them into a new age. Isn't that what you wanted when you brought me here?" "We wanted a partner," Aria whispered. Not this." Henry's expression hardened. "You should have thought of that before you decided to play God with my life. Actions have consequences, Aria. I'm simply ensuring those consequences work in my favor." As he turned to rejoin the celebration, Aria grabbed his arm. "This isn't over, Henry. You may have them fooled, but I know what you really are, and I won't let you destroy everything we've built." Henry's smile was cold as ice. "Be careful, Aria. Remember, you're carrying my child. It would be a shame if anything were to complicate the pregnancy." Aria recoiled as if slapped, her hand moving protectively to her belly. Henry leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "Don't test me. You're useful to me for now. Don't make me reconsider that assessment." As he walked away, leaving Aria trembling in his wake, Henry felt a momentary pang of something. Regret? Guilt? He pushed the feeling aside, burying it beneath layers of ambition and cold calculation. The next day, as Aria went into labor, Henry paced outside the medical chamber. Despite himself, he felt a flicker of genuine excitement. This child, his firstborn, represented the culmination of all his schemes and manipulations. When the cry of a newborn finally pierced the air, Henry burst into the room. Aria lay on the bed, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny blue-skinned infant in her arms. For a moment, as Henry gazed upon his daughter, the hardened shell he had built around himself cracked. A flood of emotions he thought long buried threatened to overwhelm him. But then the moment passed, and cold logic reasserted itself. This child was not just his daughter. She was the key to cementing his power, the first of a new ruling class that would owe everything to him. "She's perfect," he murmured, reaching out to touch the infant's cheek. Aria watched him warily. "What will you name her?" Henry considered for a moment before smiling. "Victora. It means conqueror in Latin. Fitting, don't you think?" Aria's expression fell. "Henry, please. It's not too late. We can still make this right, for her sake, if nothing else." Henry's gaze hardened as he looked at Aria. "Make what right? This is right, Aria. This is the future you chose when you brought me here, the future I'm creating for our daughter." As he cradled his newborn daughter, Henry felt the last vestiges of his old self slip away. The man he had been, moral, compassionate, human, was gone, replaced by something colder, more ruthless, a being perfectly adapted to thrive in this alien world. Aria watched him, tears streaming down her face as she realized the full magnitude of what she had helped create. She was faced with an impossible choice: stand against the monster she had inadvertently nurtured and risk everything, or submit to his will in hopes of mitigating the damage from within. As Henry turned to leave, Victora held safely in his arms. He paused at the door. "Rest up, my dear Aria. There's much work to be done. A new era is dawning, and we all have our parts to play." The door slid shut behind him, leaving Aria alone with her thoughts and the weight of her decisions. Outside, the sounds of celebration echoed through the alien city, heralding the birth of their savior's first child. But within the medical chamber, There was only silence and the crushing realization that sometimes the cure can be far worse than the disease. As Henry strode through the corridors of power, his infant daughter cradled in his arms, the full weight of his transformation settled upon him. He had come to this alien world a prisoner, a reluctant savior. Now, he walked as a conqueror, the architect of a new order. Aria's anguished face flashed in his mind, a fleeting reminder of the man he once was. But Henry pushed the thought aside, his focus locked on the future he would forge for himself and his offspring. The alien society, once so foreign and oppressive, now bent to his will. Henry had reshaped it in his image, using the very tools his captors had given him. His children would rule, their mixed heritage a symbol of a new era, one where Henry stood at the apex of power. As he presented his daughter to the adoring crowds, Henry allowed himself a moment of reflection. The journey from captive to tyrant had been a dark one, paved with manipulation and moral compromise. Yet, in the cold calculus of survival, he had emerged victorious. The story of Henry's rise serves as a stark reminder of the complexities of human nature. Pushed to extremes, even the most principled individual may find themselves capable of acts they once thought unthinkable. It's a tale that challenges our notions of heroism and villainy, blurring the lines between victim and oppressor. Thank you for following this journey into the darker aspects of human potential. While the transformation of a hero into an anti-hero may not resonate with all, it presents a plausible scenario of how circumstances can reshape a person's moral compass. Henry's story invites us to question our own ethical boundaries and consider the lengths to which we might go when faced with extraordinary circumstances. In the end, we're left to ponder. Is Henry a victim of his circumstances or the architect of his own moral downfall? And in his position, would any of us have chosen differently? The answers, like Henry's future, remain shrouded in ambiguity, leaving us to grapple with the uncomfortable truths about the human capacity for both greatness and corruption.